I woke up at 3 in the morning to find a stranger standing in my backyard, staring at me through the glass. But here's the terrifying part. He wasn't a stranger at all. I'd already met him that afternoon in the forest, and he'd followed me home. My name doesn't matter for this story, but what you need to understand before we begin is that I have a hearing disability. I'm hard of hearing, and there are sounds in this world I'll never detect, conversations I'll never fully understand, warnings I'll never hear. That night, my disability almost got me killed. If you're new to Silent Fear, welcome. We share real horror stories from real people. If this story keeps you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button, leave a comment below telling me your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss another terrifying tale. Now let's begin. This happened about 1 year ago, just after the holiday season. I live in a small suburban neighborhood in southern Quebec, the kind of place that borders a thick, sprawling forest. It's quiet here, peaceful. Most residents know each other by name. We wave when we pass on the street. We look out for one another. I've always preferred it that way. There's a warmth to small communities that you just don't find in cities. But that warmth was about to turn ice cold. I have a dog named Monty. He's a Rottweiler Husky mix, powerful and energetic, perfect for someone like me who enjoys running and staying active. During the winter months, I made it a habit to take Monty on walks through the local forest trails. These weren't difficult hikes or challenging terrain, just peaceful paths winding through snow-covered trees where we could both get some exercise and fresh air. It was a February afternoon, unremarkable in every way. I'd just finished eating a late lunch, probably around 2 or 2:30 in the afternoon, and I decided to take Monty out for a walk to burn off some calories. The moment we turned the corner on my street, heading toward the forest entrance, Monty went absolutely ballistic with excitement, like he always did, his tail wagging, his whole body wiggling with joy. It was relatively cold that day, typical for February in Quebec. A fresh blanket of snow had fallen overnight, coating the forest paths in pristine white. Everything looked clean, untouched, beautiful. I let Monty off his leash so he could run around freely. There were a few yellow patches in the snow where other dogs had marked their territory, along with several boot prints, indicating the people had already walked their dogs earlier that morning. Most dog owners in the area prefer to go out before noon because the sun sets incredibly early during winter, usually around 4 in the afternoon. After that, darkness falls quickly. So I didn't expect to encounter anyone else on the trails at that time of day. Monty and I walked for about 30 minutes, enjoying the crisp winter air and the quiet solitude of the forest. Eventually, we came to a fork in the path. One trail showed fresh footprints from earlier walkers. The other trail was completely untouched, a blank canvas of snow. Feeling somewhat adventurous that day, I decided to take the unmarked path. I have a pretty solid mental map of these trails, so I knew exactly where I was going and how to get back. The path led to a clearing, which was perfect timing because I'd been wanting to try out the binoculars I received as a Christmas gift. I'd been hoping to spot some of the native winter birds that frequent the area. I remember standing there, scanning the tree line, slowly with my binoculars when something unusual caught my attention. In the distance, partially hidden among the trees, I spotted what appeared to be a blue tarp. Focusing my binoculars more carefully, I could make out what looked like a makeshift shelter, the kind a homeless person might construct to stay warm during the winter months. My curiosity was definitely piqued. Part of me wanted to walk over and investigate, but I glanced at the sky and realized it was already getting dark. The sun was beginning its descent, and I needed to get home. I called Monty back, and we started walking back toward the main trail. He ran ahead of me like he normally does, but something about his behavior seemed different. He was much more alert than usual, his ears perked up, his nose working overtime as he sniffed the trail with unusual intensity. I'd walked these paths with him dozens of times, and I'd never seen him act quite like this. That's when I looked down at the snow beneath my feet, and my eyes widened in confusion. There was a fresh set of footprints in the snow, much larger than my own boots. I actually stopped walking, turned my own boot over, and held it up to compare with the prints in the snow. They were completely different. These prints belonged to someone else, someone with significantly larger feet than mine. But here's what made my stomach knee tighten with unease. There were no other forks or branches in this particular trail. It was a straight path. Whoever made these footprints had to have walked past me at some point. They had to have been close to me. I stood there trying to piece together the timeline. The only logical explanation was that someone must have passed me while I was distracted, looking through my binoculars at that makeshift shelter. I must not have noticed them walking by. That had to be it. I tried to convince myself it was nothing strange, just another person enjoying the trails. At this point, the light was fading rapidly. It wasn't quite dark yet, but the sun had dipped low enough that everything was taking on that peculiar twilight quality, where shadows grow longer and details become harder to distinguish. I could still make out my surroundings well enough, but I knew we needed to keep moving. We continued walking back toward the forest entrance when Monty suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. Then he whipped around and started barking relentlessly in the direction we'd just come from. Not his usual playful bark, but something aggressive, protective, warning. I turned around to see what had caught his attention. My heart nearly stopped. There was a man standing on the trail behind me, barely 1 meter away. How had he gotten so close without me noticing? He was tall, probably around 6 feet 4 inches, wearing charcoal-colored snow pants and a white camouflage hunting jacket. His hands were stuffed deep in his coat pockets. He wasn't moving toward me. He wasn't gesturing or trying to communicate. He was just standing there, perfectly still, watching me. I didn't recognize him from anyone in the neighborhood. In a small community like ours, you tend to know most people, at least by sight. This man was a complete stranger. I assumed he must be a hiker from out of town, maybe someone visiting the area for winter activities. His lips were moving. He was saying something to me, trying to communicate. But between the rapidly diminishing light and my hearing disability, I couldn't understand a single word. I couldn't read his lips clearly enough in the shadows. And I had no idea if he was speaking English or French. Both languages are commonly spoken in Quebec, and without better lighting or audio cues, I was completely lost. I felt like an absolute idiot in that moment because I'd forgotten to bring my phone with me on the walk. If I'd had it, I could have at least used it to type out a message or illuminate his face better. Instead, I tried my best to communicate through gestures, pointing to my ears and shaking my head, trying to convey that I was hard of hearing. I also gestured toward the darkening sky and pointed back toward the trail entrance, trying to indicate that it was getting late and I needed to head home. The interaction was awkward and uncomfortable. After a few more seconds of failed communication, I turned around and started walking back with Monty, glancing over my shoulder once or twice. The man didn't follow us, at least not that I could see. I arrived back home around 4:30 in the afternoon. By then, It was completely dark outside, the way winter nights fall like a curtain in Quebec. I went through my standard evening routine without giving the encounter too much thought. I fed Monty, made myself some dinner, watched a bit of television, and convinced myself that it had just been an awkward interaction with a stranger in the woods. Nothing more. I went to bed around 11 o'clock that night, tired from the walk and ready for sleep. What happened next is something that still invades my nightmares to this day. I woke up suddenly to the sensation of something wet on my hand. It was Monty, licking me insistently. He usually only does this in the morning when he wants me to get out of bed and feed him or let him outside. But something felt wrong. The room was dark, and I was disoriented. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and tapped the screen to check the time. 3 o'clock in the morning. But that wasn't all. There was a text message waiting for me sent just a few minutes earlier from my next-door neighbor. The message read, "Is everything all right over there? Monty's been barking like he's possessed." I felt a wave of confusion wash over me. I looked up from my phone screen, and that's when I realized Monty was no longer in my bedroom. The confusion immediately transformed into concern. I got out of bed and walked downstairs, my heart beginning to pound harder with each step. The house was quiet, eerily so. I found Monty in the living room, positioned at the patio door, barking hysterically at something outside in the backyard. His bark was frantic, desperate, unlike anything I'd heard from him before. My vision was still blurry from sleep as I approached the patio door, trying to see what had gotten him so worked up. I squinted into the darkness of the backyard, struggling to focus my eyes. Then the motion sensor light clicked on. The man from the forest was standing in my backyard, less than 10 feet from my patio door, staring directly at me. The same white camouflage jacket, the same imposing height, the same terrifying stillness. But this time, he wasn't a meter away on a public trail. He was in my private backyard, in the middle of the night, staring at me through the glass. Every rational thought evaporated from my mind. I didn't stop to question how he found my house. I didn't wonder what he wanted. I didn't try to understand why he was there. I just acted on pure survival instinct. I stepped back from the patio door and immediately grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely control my fingers, but I managed to open my messages and text 911. I've never typed faster in my entire life, explaining that there was an intruder in my backyard, that I was alone, that I needed help immediately. I ran upstairs with Monty right beside me and went straight to my bedroom. I reached under my bed and pulled out the machete I keep there for emergencies. I'm a shorter woman, maybe 5 feet 3 inches or 5 feet 4 inches, and I do have a background in martial arts. But I know from my training that the best move in any dangerous situation is to avoid fighting altogether if possible. The weapon was for absolute last resort. I sat on my bedroom floor, positioned opposite the door, with my back against the wall and Monty pressed against my side. The machete was gripped tightly in both hands. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my ears, in my fingertips. Each beat felt like it might be my last. I could feel sweat forming on my palms despite the cold. I tried to control my breathing, tried to stay calm, tried to listen for any sounds in the house. But remember, I'm hard of hearing. I couldn't trust my ears to warn me if someone was coming. I could only watch and wait. Time seemed to stop. Every second felt like an hour. I kept my eyes locked on my bedroom door, watching for any sign of movement, any indication that he was in the house. Then Monty suddenly jumped to his feet and started barking violently at the bedroom door. Not toward the window, not toward any other part of the room, specifically at the door. I watched in absolute horror as a shadow appeared in the gap beneath my door. Someone was standing directly outside my bedroom. The shadow moved slightly, shifting position, and I could tell from the movement that whoever it was testing the door, deciding whether to try the handle, deciding whether to come in. I sat there frozen, gripping the machete so tightly my knuckles turned white, watching that shadow move beneath the door. Every muscle in my body was tensed, ready to fight if that door opened. My mind was racing through scenarios, calculating angles, remembering my training, preparing for the worst. Those were without question the longest minutes of my entire life. I sat there, barely breathing, waiting for the door handle to turn, waiting for the door to burst open, waiting for him to come in. But it never happened. The shadow eventually disappeared. I heard nothing else. The house fell silent again except for Monty's occasional low growl. When the police finally arrived, I practically collapsed with relief. I explained everything to them while they searched the entire property with flashlights. The patio door glass was completely shattered, fragments scattered across the living room floor. But besides that, nothing in the house appeared to be missing or disturbed. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing had been moved. The officers found the gate in my backyard, standing wide open. It's a gate that leads directly into the forest, and they believed that's how he'd entered my property and where he'd escaped to when he heard the sirens approaching. I told them about the makeshift shelter I'd seen earlier in the woods, thinking maybe he'd been living there, maybe that's where he'd been staying. They said they'd investigate, but I could tell from their expressions they didn't expect to find anything. I couldn't stay in that house that night. I packed up some belongings for myself and Monty, and we went to stay with a family friend for several days, while I arranged to have the patio door replaced and added extra security measures to my home. I never received any follow-up from the police after that initial night. No phone calls, no updates, no arrests, nothing. The case just seemed to disappear into the void of unsolved incidents. Ever since that night, my entire routine changed. I don't take Monty into the forest anymore. We stick strictly to residential streets, where there are streetlights, where there are houses, where there are people who might see if something goes wrong. I try not to think too much about that night, about what could have happened, about what that man wanted from me. But late at night, when I'm lying in bed and the house is quiet, I can't help but wonder, what would have happened if he'd opened that bedroom door? What did he want? Why did he follow me home? And most terrifying of all, is he still out there, in those woods, watching, waiting for another opportunity? I'll never know the answers to those questions, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. If this story gave you chills, please hit that like button and let the algorithm know you enjoyed it. Drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done in this situation. Would you have gone to the woods to investigate the shelter the next day? Would you have moved to a different neighborhood? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. And please subscribe to Silent Fear so you never miss another true horror story. We post new terrifying tales every week. Hit that notification bell so you're alerted the moment we upload. Stay safe out there, everyone. Lock your doors. Trust your instincts. And remember, sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones hiding under your bed. They're the ones standing in your backyard at 3 a.m, deciding whether tonight is the night they finally come inside. Until next time, this is Silent Fear, reminding you that reality is often more terrifying than fiction.